join me in welcoming Diane.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Would you like to increase your visibility to management? Would you like to enhance your work skills? Would you like to bump up your performance reviews? Yeah, someone's nodding. You can do all that and more when you develop the skills of being an excellent leader. Today, you'll discover 4 ways that you can be an excellent leader. But before we do that, what is leadership? In preparation for this presentation, I decided to consult the world's foremost authority on the topic of leadership. Dr. Google, yes. As I was literally searching for leadership, how many hits do you think I got on the word leadership? Some ideas? A lot. 4 million. Other guesses? Well, it was quite a lot. It was 137 million hits on the word leadership. That was a little overwhelming. So I thought, maybe I'll just read another book on the topic. So I went to Amazon and put the word leadership in its search engine. And that narrowed it considerably. Only 112,000 books on the topic of leadership. Clearly, a lot of people have a lot to say on the topic of leadership. So, what is leadership? On your handout at the very top, and if you don't have a handout, well, I hope you have a handout because I don't see any more. There is a space for answering the question, what is leadership? Does everybody have a handout? I've got one here. Okay, if anyone needs one, looks like we're all covered. So jot down a word or a phrase that you think would define leadership for you. Go ahead and write that. It could be a word, it could be a phrase. When you hear the word leadership, what does that mean to you? What are some of your ideas on leadership? Can I hear some ideas that people have on leadership? Coach. What else? Bravery. Influence. Example. Inspiring. Empowering. All of those things are ways that we could define leadership. Now, when I would ask you who are leaders, who is top of mind when you think of the word leader? Just pop out some people. Who's a leader? Excuse me?
Executives.
Executives? Any specific people? President Obama. Martin Luther King Jr., alive or dead. Anyone else that you have top of mind to be a leader? Okay, well, if you had asked me that question when I was about 10 years old, my answer would have been, yes. Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise. Like many children born in the early 60s, I sat glued to the television set whenever Star Trek came on. And for a long time, Captain James T. Kirk was my example of leadership. He wasn't the smartest of his crew. Spock knew more about science. Scotty knew more about engineering. And Bones knew more about medicine. But what Captain Kirk brought to the table was leadership. His crew would have followed him to the ends of the universe. Actually, I think they did. Now, you might think that I had a crush on Captain Kirk. Actually, I could spend 5 minutes just looking at this picture. But no, at 10 years old, my heart belonged to Spock. Live long and prosper. I was a complete nerd, but I was an inspired nerd. And for a long time, Captain James T. Kirk's example of leadership stayed with me. Now, when I asked the question, who comes top of mind when you think of a leader? I was wondering, did you even consider your own name? Yes, I have one person nodding yes. Either by choice or by default, you are a leader. If you are a supervisor or manager, you're a leader. If you are part of a family, You're probably a leader in that family. If you're part of an organization or an association, you are a leader. I like thinking of a leader as someone not at the top of the org chart, but as someone at its center with influence around that person. Today, you'll learn how to use 4 tools of leadership, 4 ways to be an excellent leader. Expectations. What you expect is what you get. Encouragement. Build up people to build up business. Empathy. Listen from your heart. And empowerment. Release the power within people. Now you have a handout in front of you with what I call the leader's shield. And we'll be marching around that shield, and you can fill out the very few fill-in-the-blanks that are on that particular handout. Let's start with expectations. What you expect is what you get. Many years ago, I worked as a cognitive skills trainer for a Learning RX franchise, training kids on how to be better thinkers. And on my very first day of training, after my very first student, my supervisor came up to me and handed me a trainer's observation form. She had been discreetly making notes of how I was doing on the training. And let's just say, although she said I was very encouraging, everything else was needs improvement. Well, how do you feel when someone points out, pretty much you need to improve in everything? Not so great, right? And if there are people in the back, there are some seats over here, so feel free to come over here and take some seats. That kind of was a downer for me to get that feedback that I pretty much needed to improve on everything. And then she said, oh, but don't feel bad about it because we expect that with new trainers, that they pretty much will all need to be improving in almost everything. Well, that really didn't make me want to improve. And as I reflected on that later, I thought, you know what? Expectations can change reality. When I expect a lot of myself or someone else, my feedback tends to accentuate the positive, and that tends to enhance the performance. On the other hand, if I don't expect very much of myself or someone else, then my feedback tends to be more negative and performance suffers as a result. Expectations can change reality. And that's been proven in several studies. One particular study that's well known was at the Air Force Preparatory Academy, where they had 100 airmen and they divided them into 5 different math classes. And they told the teachers of the math classes that their students were either of exceptionally high ability or exceptionally low ability. Well, no surprise, at the end of the year, the students labeled high ability much outperformed those labeled low ability. But the truth was, the students were randomly assigned to the 5 math classes. Somehow, in the interaction of the teacher and her expectations, she or he affected their performance. So expectations can change reality. On your handout, where you see that I, take your pen and put a plus sign there to remind yourself to expect the positive with people, because what you expect is what you get. Encouragement, our next E to being an excellent leader. Encouragement is made up of the prefix N, E-N, which means to bring into the condition of, and the base word courage. So when you encourage someone, you help bring them into the condition of having courage. So how can we offer encouragement? Well, when I was working with that little 8-year-old boy at Learning RX, I learned several lessons that can be applied across the board. One way to show encouragement is to show genuine interest. This little boy was so discouraged by school. He wasn't doing very well. His parents were upset with him, and nobody believed in his dream. He wanted to be a truck driver. And nobody said, hey, good choice. So I decided to show an interest in what he wanted to be, and I showed him how our training would help him develop the skills so he could be a really good truck driver if that's what he really wanted to be when he grew up. Showing a genuine interest in people is encouraging to them. You can also encourage people by helping them. Sometimes you're working with someone and there's a task that's difficult. Perhaps they just need you to model the task. Show me how it's done. Or maybe they're not ready to take on the whole task, so you can modify the task, give them a smaller subset so that they have some success that they can build upon. Of course, you can always use encouraging phrases. And this isn't just good job, because sometimes you need to be realistic with your encouraging phrases, such as, you know, I know that's really hard for you, but you're working hard, you're making progress, I know you'll make it. That's a realistic way to be encouraging to people. And finally, show appreciation. This can be giving thanks. It could also be giving compliments. But how do you give compliments? Now, who can tell me what this is? A what?
Sandwich.
It's a sandwich, but what? Well, someone here got it right. It is often called a compliment sandwich because you're often told, you know, to soften the blow of a criticism, you can put it in between the fluffy buns of a compliment. Well, how do you feel when someone does that? When you know they really just want to deliver the criticism? Yeah. They're chicken. Did someone say that? They're chicken when they do that, of course. So I'm going to suggest that you do not give a criticism sandwich. What you might want to consider is upping your ratio of compliments to criticism or feedback that's maybe less than positive. Several years ago in 1992, researcher John Gottman had a hypothesis that in marriage relationships, if there were at least 5 positives to every 1 negative, that the marriage would survive and thrive. But as that ratio went down to 1 to 1, there was a cascade toward divorce. He decided to test that hypothesis, and he brought in 700 newlywed couples and videotaped a 15-minute conversation that was just on ordinary things. He then had his team of researchers review the videotapes and simply come up with the ratio of positive comments or gestures to negative comments or gestures, and based on that ratio, predict whether the couple would be together in 10 years. How accurate do you think their predictions were? Any guesses? 80%, 100%, 75%. 100% is closer. It was actually 94% accuracy based on a 15-minute conversation of newlyweds. Now, when it comes to work environments, maybe you don't need to have a compliment sandwich quite this big with 5 to 1 as the ratio, because more recent research by Dr. Barbara Fredrickson has shown that in work teams, if you have at least a 3 to 1 ratio, that the work team is much more productive. Now you might be wondering, is it possible to be too positive? Do you think it's possible to be too positive?
Yes.
And you're right if you said yes. If you approach 12 to 1 or more, then productivity actually starts taking a nosedive. But let me guess, where you work, too much positivity is probably not a problem, right? So strive to have at least a 3 to 1 positive to negative ratio where you work. Compliments and appreciation can make a difference in many areas of life. Do you remember Simon Delivers, the grocery delivery service? They went out of business in 2008, dealt a fatal blow by the economy. In 1999, however, I was one of their first customers. I thought this was an awesome idea. Order groceries online, get them delivered to your door. It was an awesome idea. They were terrible with execution the first few months. I would order meat and they would forget to bring it. or they'd forget the milk, or I'd get somebody else's order. Like the first 2 months was awful. Now you would have thought with that kind of service I would have quit. But they were so good at making up. The CEO would call me and apologize, and they'd send me flowers. And if they forgot my meat, the next day my meat would be delivered and they'd take it off my bill. I was beginning to hope that they would make mistakes just because I liked how good they were at showing appreciation. Well, when they finally went out of business in 2008, I had been a loyal customer from 1999 till that time, and I figured out that over the 9 years I was their customer, I spent about $60,000 in groceries, all because they were so appreciative those first few months. So a little appreciation can go a long way. And I'm sure you say thank you, right? That's something we all learn as kindergartners. It's like a knee-jerk reflexive action to say thank you. But are your thank yous naked thank yous? I'm going to suggest maybe you want to dress up your thank you a little bit with providing a reason, a thank you for. For example, when my son takes out the garbage, after I pick myself up off the floor from shock, I could say, thank you for taking out the garbage without being told. It shows how responsible you're becoming. A little thank you for can give people a feeling that you're not just mouthing the words. It can also shape behavior. So when you're giving appreciation, you want to be specific, deserved, and timely. And this is on the second page of your handout. Appreciation should be specific, deserved, and timely. You want to include what the person did and the positive impact of what they did. The dressed up thank you. You can be specific on what did they do? Thank you for. I really appreciate your help with. I was impressed with how, without your help, etc. And you also want to be specific on what was the positive impact. Like, so what? What was the benefit to you or to the organization or possibly even to the person on their thank you? We won the account. Your example inspired others to do their best. Following your advice helped me be successful. At the bottom of that page, you're going to get a turn right now, and you see a couple of spaces. I'd like you to think of 1 or 2 people who you could thank, what they did specifically, and what the impact is, why it was important. You can pick someone you work with. You could pick someone you used to work with. You can pick someone who's here today. You could pick someone in your family. I'll give you just a moment, probably about a minute or so, to think of who, what, and why. So go ahead and take a moment to write down. Well, the gal with the broken arm was able to write it with probably your non-dominant hand.
I'm right-handed.
Oh, you're lucky. You may or may not have time to finish writing something, but right now I'd like you to share. I know, the keynote speaker said, don't you hate it when they ask you to partner up? So I won't make you partner up. You can go in groups of 3 or 4. And the first table could turn to the second table or the third table to the fourth table, and then the fifth table. Just kind of divide yourself into groups of 3 or 4 and share briefly your thank you, the who, the what, and the impact. Do we have someone who'd like to share their thank you? Oh boy, this is HR people. I thought they were like really outgoing. We have someone.
I'll share my thank you. I thank my mother. She doesn't know her seat. She's sitting next to me. For driving today so I could rest because I was sick.
Oh, well, that's great. Thank you, Mom. Anyone else who would like to share? Well, you probably have written something down. I suggest you actually take action. If there's one thing you do today, thank the person. If they're not alive, maybe just make a note of honor to that person. And if they are alive, thank them before it's too late to thank them. So encouragement. When you build up people, you build up business. That's the lower left on that shield, if you want to write that down. Encouragement. When you build up people, you build up business. Now back to the top of the shield on the right is empathy. Empathy is trying to put yourself in someone else's place emotionally, trying to walk a mile in their shoes. Sometimes it's really hard to understand why people are acting the way they're acting or why they've made a decision they've made. I will use this phrase or a variation of it, because if you overdo it, it sounds kind of weird. But the help me understand concept. Think of it as a concept more so than just a phrase. It can be used to diffuse a contentious situation where you find you're ready to butt heads with someone over someone. Take a step back, and rather than pushing or running away from conflict, ask the other person, can you help me understand how this will work or why you made this decision? To say it without judgment in your voice. And usually one of two things will happen. Number one, you may actually understand. Number two, when the other person tries to help you understand, sometimes they will come to see why perhaps you didn't understand. So use this phrase or a variation, this phrase or help me understand. Empathy. It's all about learning to listen from your heart. This paper sack reminds me of one way I really learned empathy. It's actually an Arby's bag. Imagine, go back in time with me a little bit, that there's an old woman sitting in this chair. I handed the old woman the Arby's bag. She peered inside. I wanted the big roast beef sandwich. This one is puny and hard as a rock, too. Well, that was the big roast beef sandwich. The choices were the big roast beef sandwich, the bigger roast beef sandwich, and the biggest roast beef sandwich. You asked for a big roast beef sandwich. I just got you what you asked for. It's not what I wanted, though. The old woman was cranky. She was demanding. She was my mother. And she really wasn't that old. She was 68 years old and afflicted with multiple myeloma, a cancer of the blood. And she'd come to live with my family late in 2006. We had a lot of conversations like the one about the Arby's sandwich. And I realized later that I was responding to her from my logical self. I was listening logically. What I really needed to do was to learn to listen from my heart. So how do you listen from your heart? The first thing to do is to empty your ego. Oh, that's so hard. To let go of assumptions, to let go of agendas, to let go of the need to be right. I had assumed that my mother's request for a sandwich was all about hunger. So my agenda was simply to bring her back what she asked for. I was right. I brought her back exactly what she asked for. She should be grateful. But I wasn't listening with my heart. Maybe I needed to respond with a little more grace. I needed to listen empathetically, to listen to understand, to seek to understand before seeking to be understood. If I had thought about my mother's position, she had lost just about everything. She'd lost her home, she'd lost her community, she'd lost her car, she lost her job, she lost all her cats save one. She couldn't even get a fast food sandwich that she wanted because she was so dependent on me. Her wanting a specific sandwich really wasn't about hunger or the size of a sandwich. It reflected a deeper pain. And it would have been helpful if I had listened reflectively, where she would have felt that I understood her, even by saying back some of her own words, like, well, it is a pretty puny sandwich. You know, if someone lets you know that they've understood because they repeat back, it makes you feel like, oh, someone gets me finally. Listening from the heart. It's easy to say but not so easy to do. My mother helped me get better at listening from the heart. After a few months, she had to go to a nursing home where I would visit her a few times a week. Well, on one of the last visits, actually the last visit, I walked into her room, and there she was, laying in bed. Her breathing was labored, and her body was covered with black sores. Just the day before, I'd signed the DNR, do not resuscitate, the DNI, do not intubate. I'd signed her up for hospice. And I'd written her obituary, dutiful daughter that I am. And I thought she'd like to hear what I'd written in her obituary. She might be curious. So I brought it with me. She was not interested. I don't know if you've ever been around someone who's dying, but often as their body shuts down, they begin to shut down and shut people out. There really wasn't anything more to say, or so I thought. So as I left that day and almost had the door closed behind me, I heard her voice. Di? That was her nickname for me, Di. Yes, Mom? Di, I love you. That was what needed to be said. That was what was unfinished. My mother had listened from her heart and heard what I didn't know how to say. And those were her last words to me. Great last words. One of my mother's favorite books, The Little Prince, has a character that says, if I could remember how it goes now, it is only with the heart that one can hear rightly. Excuse me, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. I might change that to be, it is only with the heart that one can hear rightly. What is essential is invisible and inaudible to the ear. So listen from the heart. Moving on to the next E, empowerment. That's on the lower right of your shield. Now, empowerment is something that I learned way back in grade school, playing tug of war. I was one of those big, uncoordinated kids. So with tug of war, it was like the only sport that I wasn't picked last for. And I remember one time in 6th grade when we were playing tug of war, and my friend Kim, who was a lot like me, uncoordinated, but unlike me, she was small and not very strong, she got picked last. And she was right in front of me on the rope. So we're pulling, that rough rope, starting to like scrape the hand. We're pulling and tugging, and it's going nowhere because the teams are evenly matched. So I whisper to Kim, well, maybe a loud whisper, Kim, pull harder! And her little arms started shaking, and she was pulling as hard as she could, and poof, we fell back in a heap. We'd won. That's when I learned that even the weakest person can make a difference. That none of us is as powerful as all of us. So when it comes to empowerment, it's about releasing the power within people. Empowerment. Release the power within people. Here are 3 ways that you can empower others. There are more than 3, but I only have time for 3. One way is to adapt your leadership. One size does not fit all. Another way is to share power. And the third way is to champion the underdog. This was my conception of leadership for a long time, a passing of the baton, of delegation. And it's probably my concept, or was my concept, because I encountered many leaders who that was their only concept of leadership, and it didn't always work. My very first job out of college is a case in point. I was an engineer for General Dynamics, and my very first job that I was given, there was no great onboarding then, was to reconfigure missiles from spare parts. What that meant was I was given a list of missile parts and a list of spare parts, and somehow I was supposed to combine them without benefit of a computer. That would be like if I took you to a junkyard, gave you a list of parts and said, build me a Ford truck. How well would that go? Well, it didn't go that well for me. I tried asking the guys in the shop for some assistance, but as a 22-year-old female engineer in the early 80s, they did not give me a lot of respect. And my boss didn't give me any explanation. I didn't even know why this was important. I could only assume it was to save money. In fact, I don't even know the outcome. I eventually did give them a list of all the parts we had that would go in a missile, but I don't even know what happened to it. So for me, that was an example of bad leadership. But what goes around comes around. Maybe you've even worn the bad leader badge of shame yourself a few times. I know I have. A few years ago, I was president of a Toastmasters club, and I thought that people would learn their role, they would make a plan, they would execute the plan, and all would be wonderful. I was sadly mistaken and way too optimistic. My team as a whole and some of the individuals were not ready for that level of delegation. And that's when I learned about situational leadership. Have you heard of situational leadership? Well, situational leadership is all about the leaders, the followers, and the situation. Now, on the back side of your handout, you will see the graph that is taken from the 1-Minute Manager Builds High-Performing Teams, and I'm only going to touch on this concept. It's a very easy-to-read book, as many of the 1-Minute Manager books are. So I'm just going to briefly explain the concept, and it boils down to adjusting your leadership style to the people whom you are leading. So, if you have somebody who's brand new, and it could be they're just brand new to a task. They may be experienced in other things, but they're just brand new to a task or brand new to a team. They may need some more direction. They may need you to tell them what to do, and even to some extent how to do it. You may need to provide resources. And as that person or team becomes more experienced, you can move more into a coaching role, where you're still going to provide a fair amount of direction, but you'll also have more supportive behavior where you'll try to involve them in their own problem solving. And with a little more experience, you cut down on the direction, continue to provide support, because now you have a team that has the skills, but they may not be totally confident, or the person may not be totally confident in those skills, and they need you to support them in decisions. And finally, you may get to the delegating mode with some teams and some people, where they are confident, competent, they've got great attitudes, and you can delegate. What all too often happens is that there's a mismatch. So what do you call it when you or someone else is highly competent, you know what you're doing, and you have a leader or manager who tells you exactly what to do and how to do it? What's that called? Micromanaging. Yes, that's really annoying. Now, I hate to admit it, I like to be a tiny bit of a micromanager just at the start. Because if you loosen the reins too quickly, what happens? You get a runaway horse. It's kind of like if you have a teenager and you start out with a curfew at midnight, and that was a bad decision, and then you move it to 10 p.m., there's a lot of resentment. But if you start out at 10 p.m. and then move it up to midnight, that has a little less resentment. So my suggestion is, if you don't know the person or the team very well, at the beginning, maybe start out a little bit micromanaging, but loosen those reins quickly as soon as you can see that they are capable. Then you can also not only adapt your leadership, but share power. How do you share power? You ask. You ask people, what do you need to do your best work, to provide your best value? Or what do you need to change for you to provide your best value? You want to share information and resources. The days are over of hoarding information and resources so that you can have control. You may need to provide training that people don't even know they need to have. You want to share roles and responsibilities, and there's some great benefits in doing this. Number one, you could spread the workload. Number two, you develop empathy for people when they have to share the roles. Like, oh, I didn't know that's what was involved in facilitating a meeting. That's quite a lot of work. Then you want to share reasons. And better yet, help people buy into the reasons by helping them develop the reasons with you. So share power. Then you want to champion the underdog. This is a picture of my grandmother, my mother, and me. I'm probably 3 or 4 in this picture, but it was when I was 6 years old. It was 1968, Christmas Eve. I still believed in Santa Claus, and we were on the way to the family Christmas party. My mother's side of the family. We'd driven all the way from Grand Forks, North Dakota to Pueblo, Colorado, just in time. Santa Claus was handing out the gifts, calling each child's name, and as it got closer and closer to my turn, my hand was squeezing my grandmother's hand, and finally, the last gift, my gift. And Santa Claus raised it up high, called out, "Ho, ho, ho, Teresa coffee!" What? I felt like I'd been sucker punched. Has that ever happened to you? That someone else got something you deserved? Like a promotion or a job? Well, that's how I felt. After I recovered from the shock, I looked up at my Nana, my big Italian grandma, and I said, "Santa forgot me!" And my Nana scooped me up in those fleshy arms that every morning rolled out ravioli at an Italian restaurant, and said, "Oh no, Santa did not forget you." And she passed me off to my parents, who tried to shield me from what Grandma was doing, but I saw her work the crowd, and I saw her get her younger brothers to work the crowd too, my great uncles. Well, a few minutes later, a sheepish-looking Santa Claus approached me. "Little Diane Williams, I'm sorry, your gift was stuck at the bottom of my bag." And with a flourish, he pulled out a wad of bills. $50! A small fortune to a 6-year-old in 1968. Well, the tears vanished, and I looked over at my Nana, and she was smiling like a Cheshire cat. My grandmother taught me a couple of important lessons that day. The first was that it pays to have mafia connections. Well, it does pay to have influential people in your life. And the second was the importance of being a champion for the underdog. My grandmother knew that. And many years later, at her funeral, the pews were packed, and person after person stood up to tell how my grandmother had helped them when they were down and out, how she'd been their champion and made a difference in her life. Well, my grandmother was not a wealthy woman, but she was a wise woman. She was a champion of the underdog. So take that lesson from my grandmother. Apply it to the people you work with. Not like you're going to always be their savior, because that's not empowering. But once in a while, give people hope when they've lost hope by being their champion. Empowerment. Release the power within people, because none of us is as powerful as all of us. The 4 E's of an excellent leader. Take these tools and use them at work, at home, and in your organizations. Expectations. What you expect is what you get. Encouragement. Build up people to build up business. Empathy. Listen from the heart. And empowerment. Release the power within people. Now I have time for a bonus E. You want a bonus E? Sure. Okay. Well, it's not exactly an E. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Bonus E. Set a good example. Okay, that's the E part. Set a good example by being a person of, this doesn't start with an E, integrity. This is really the basis of leadership, because none of the other stuff matters if you do it without integrity. And most of us learn integrity along the way growing up. We have experiences where we learn the importance of it. Well, one experience I had was many years ago when my children were in preschool. and I had dropped my daughter off at a home daycare. And as I was backing up out of the driveway, crunch! Oh, don't you hate that sound? I got out, surveyed the damage. No damage to my van, but the preschool teacher's truck had a foot-long gash. Oh man, why is she parking in her driveway when she knows people are going to be pulling in and out? You know how you start justifying sometimes? Well, you know, nobody saw me do it. And there's no damage on my car. So if I just left, nobody would know. I mean, you know, we were hurting for money, and this was, I'm sure, over $600 worth of damage. It became a question of integrity. Would I maintain integrity or not? Now, maybe you remember geometry class. It was a long time ago for some of us. Do you remember what you call two triangles that have similar size and shape? And do you remember that? Good guess, not quite right. Now, you know what, if nobody gets it right, if I were talking to engineers, of course, you know, what? Well, it wouldn't be so fun talking to engineers. I hope no one here, no, you're not an engineer. I'm an engineer, so I can make fun of myself. Okay, they're called congruent triangles. Okay, and was I going to be congruent? Were my values going to match up with my behavior or vice versa? Were they going to be congruent? Were they going to be equal? Was I going to act in a way that reflected what I believed? Well, I thought about it. Okay, I admit, I actually thought about it, probably for about a minute. I debated with myself. I thought, you know what? No, I value being accountable. So I can't not do this. So I went up to the door, knocked, told the preschool teacher what had happened, and it was over $600 worth of damage. That was the cost, $600 of damage. Intact integrity, priceless. Imagine that this balloon is going to be filled up with my integrity and your integrity. Let's see if I have enough air. This is my exercise. Okay, so if this is my integrity, let's say I value telling the truth, but I lie. Lose a little bit integrity. Let's say I value kindness, but I'm cruel. Lose a little more integrity. Let's say I value taking responsibility, but I shirk my responsibilities. Lost a little more integrity. Pretty soon, what happens? Sorry about that, Glenn. I don't have any integrity left. Now, who wants to or can even follow a leader like that? So integrity is the underpinning. Because if you use the 4 E's without integrity, you're just being what? Manipulative. But with integrity, you overlay the 4 E's of an excellent leader, you can make a difference. You can make a difference in your career. You can make a difference in your organization. You can make a difference for the people around you. So, have high expectations. Expect the positive. Have empathy for the people that you work with. Listen from your heart. Encourage people. Help them to have courage and empower them as well. So, pick up your shield of leadership and walk the talk and walk into the hearts and minds of the people whom you lead. Thank you.